Hello there, this is Gabor again with the CMOS, the Code Maven open source podcast and screencast. And with me is Joel Berger. Hi, Joel.
Hi, good
How
to
are
see you,
you?
Gabor.
Good to see you too. And to those who listen to this podcast, good to
And
hear you
good to talk to you.
too. Anyway, welcome to the show. We are going to talk about Mojolicious, the Perl-based web framework. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about you. Tell me a little bit about your background and how you could get into programming and how did you get into using Mojolicious.
Sure. Well, I actually have a PhD in physics, and in my research, I was doing some modeling of electron microscopes. And I decided I needed to do some programming to do this, and I already had a little bit of Perl work from doing some text processing. Of course, how does everyone start with Perl, right? Someone says, you need a regex for that, right?
Yeah.
But I had learned some Perl, and so I started making big models for these electrons and learned quite a bit of programming that way. And eventually, once I got my PhD, it happened that the U.S. had its sequester, if you've heard this term, basically where the government decided that in order to cut the budgets, they were going to do some sort of a deal where they would all cut the budgets at the same time, but they all excluded their favorite things, so science got cut more than the rest. And it was very hard for scientists. So luckily I had quite a bit of Perl programming by this point because of all that modeling I was doing. And I asked around at my local Perl mongers, Chicago Perl mongers, where I'm still quite active. And they found me a job in the programming world, and I've been programming ever since, mostly in Perl. And now I'm lucky enough to actually be working in a Mojolicious shop here in Chicago. It's called Server Central. We do server hosting and whatever. But we are doing a lot of our back-end work now in Mojolicious, as well as some other languages. The other groups are using some other languages, but of course, the group that I'm in hired me because they were doing Mojolicious already, and it's been a lot of fun working there.
Can you tell a little bit more? What kind of things do you do with Mojolicious? I mean, backend programming, web hosting
Yeah,
company.
we're writing a server deployment system where the idea is that for our own internal use, it's going to look like cloud provisioning, like cloud server provisioning, like if you have a Linode or any other well-known hosting companies, you can click a button and it gives you a new server. But our company is actual physical servers. So we are writing the software and an API and all this to actually spin up real physical servers in that sort of same convenient way. And that'll help us respond more when a new client will come to us and say, hey, we need 50 new servers. We won't need to take all the humans out to the racks and get them installing operating systems and all that. We're going to have API calls and all that other fancy stuff so that they can provision operating systems and set up networks and such all through the web front end. And that'll all run through Mojolicious. And we've actually got a fair amount of it working already. It's a very exciting project.
So do you like this is a web application basically, just an internal one, right?
Yes, but it's got many components because, of course, we have backside networks that we don't want the front end to have access to because, of course, you wouldn't want the security implications of allowing the front end to have access to your server's backends. That's just terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
So we have all kinds of isolation there too. So there are some issues of proxying and all that other things and then, of course, Mojolicious does that quite well too.
So besides so you like Mojolicious and you liked it before you started with this company, right?
Yes. Actually, even while I was still a graduate student, I was starting to get into web programming just for my own fun, and I happened upon Mojolicious more or less by accident. I think, as many people do, you sort of pick your first web framework because you've heard of it, and the thing that really kept me were some of the features that I'm sure we'll get to describe later, but specifically the asynchronous stuff really played with my brain in the right way. I really enjoyed working on non-blocking code.
Mm-hmm. Non-buckling like in Ajax, like in Node.
Like in Node, yeah, and actually that's a great way to segue into talking a little bit about Mojo. I like to describe Mojolicious as sort of a Node.js-like framework for Perl. Node.js is built on a reactive event loop, and so is Mojolicious. So all of the incoming calls, outgoing calls are all event-based, but that also lets you have the freedom to do things like asynchronous database queries or responding via WebSockets or all kinds of other things you can't do when you have to do a procedural request response platform. And because Perl didn't have a framework built on a non-blocking event loop like that, it was rather difficult to write a web application in that way. It wasn't impossible. You could use Poe or you could use any event to write this, but you had to be a little closer to the web frame to the event loop than most people would like to be. And so when you build a web framework on top of it, it isolates you from that. You can do a lot more. It feels more like regular programming for the most part, as much as non-blocking ever can do that.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you, because in my feeling, coming from the blocking world or growing up in that, writing non-blocking code like Node is a little strange, and things that seem straightforward were straightforward. It's like a little bit of
And if
strange.
you do very complex things, there's really no way to avoid that. But for the most part, if you really are just doing, say, make a non-blocking web database request, or maybe you make a request to another web service in a non-blocking way, the way that you then call back to your original client is very natural, and you don't have to worry about it too much. Of course, if you start doing things like I'm making 12 calls to 3 different services and you can do them in batches of whatever, it starts to get complex, of course, but you don't need to start at that level. And actually, I should say here, a lot of people come to us and say, oh, it's Mojolicious, but I'm afraid of it because it's non-blocking. That scares me. You don't need to do anything non-blocking. It works just fine as a blocking framework.
Okay,
There are
and
still parts of it that are reacting in the background, but you don't have to think about that at all if you don't want to.
and if you start out that way, if you start with the blocking way, which is like I think most of the people are familiar with, can you switch over to the non-blocking mode, or how
Of course.
difficult it is?
The only thing that becomes a little bit difficult is if you've got very long-running processes that you've started. You start to, because you've now blocked the loop, the next iterations of the loop also are blocked. So you,
Okay,
it's a tricky question, right? In a normal web app, you will have no problem going to sort of non-blocking incrementally. The bigger problem is if you've got sort of gigantic database queries that take minutes to complete, or other crazy things. But you usually, anything where you haven't had to extend the client's timeout, you'll probably be fine anyway,
yeah, I
right?
mean
Because
if
normally the client will time out first anyway.
yeah, I mean I saw a lot of all kind of solutions for this problem when you have a long query and then the client keeps asking, "Are you ready yet? Are you ready yet?" And really strange solutions. So you say that with Mojolicious, can you solve it much easier, or?
Well, you can. So there are several ways around this. First of all, you can do sort of well, the easiest ways, and particularly if you're using one of the so Mojolicious project has spawned a couple of sort of spin-off projects that wrap databases in a more asynchronous way. Um, the primary one is Postgres. Our project founder, Sebastian Riedel, has really taken on to Postgres lately, and actually one of our other core members, Abhijit Menunsen, I hope I'm saying that right, is he's Crab on IRC, that's a lot easier to say,
Okay.
is also on the Postgres development team. So that's a really cool crossover we have there. When we have questions about Postgres, we can just call over Crab and say, hey, this thing is confusing us, and he can help us out. But we have a wrapper for, it's still just using DBI, DBI : DBD : PG, but it provides you a non-blocking interface. And when you do that, you can set you've got this query that's going to take 5 minutes to run. And assuming you've set up all of your timeouts correctly, you can keep serving other clients while that query is running. And when the query is completed and it starts sending you data back, then you can respond to that client. That's the easiest way to do it. If you can't do that for some reason, if you're not using a database that has a reactive or a non-blocking client, then you can do several different sorts of forking, where you fork after getting the request, do your computation in some other other process, and then you pipe the results back to your original server. And we have plugins for that too. I've written one called Mojolicious plugin fork call. It's actually Mojo IOLOOP fork call too, but don't worry about that. And Jan Henning Thorsen, another of the Mojo core developers, has one called read-write fork, which is you can actually interact with your forked process. You can send it data over over a pipe, and it thinks that that's standard in, and you can send data back over it. So that's for doing really long-running things where you want to monitor some process or whatever. So there are plenty of options for what we call unblocking code, and they all work fairly well, with a slight asterisk around Windows, of course, because forking and piping and things don't work so well on Windows. But actually, with the new Windows subsystem for Linux, which is the real name for what people have been calling Bash on Windows, but it's really called WSL, or Windows Subsystem for Linux, we've actually had some fairly good reports of Mojolicious's, the corner cases that Windows didn't work as well are working quite nicely on Windows Subsystem for Linux. So we're very excited about that.
I see. So, besides this non-blocking mode, what else would you say as the killer feature of Mojolicious? Why would someone pick Mojolicious?
So I think the biggest thing is API consistency, right? We are very used to, in the Perl world, taking pieces from all over different parts of CPAN, and each one presents a slightly different interface. And we're very used to that. And it's not like that's a bad thing. But Mojolicious was designed really to work together with itself quite well. You can, of course, use whichever modules you want. But if you use the tools that come with it, and it comes with a lot of built-in tools like a DOM parser and a JSON parser, and I'm sure I'm going to forget everything because I'm on the spot here, but it comes with lots of batteries included. And the really nice thing as you get to use them more and more is that they were all designed with the same API in mind, and consistency is always a key for us. I already watched your first video with Jason Chrome from the Dancer group, and I think I probably ought to comment that for a lot of the people in the Perl world, we value stability over everything else. And I think it would be wrong to say, to not say that Mojolicious takes a slightly different approach to this. We have a very defined breakage policy where we can at specific times break backwards compatibility. And we've done that more in the past than we have lately, but we have done it quite a bit. And the point has been, it allows us to keep making the framework more and more consistent. And if we need to change a thing that would change that consistency, we can change it other places too. And the code, as a result, has now gotten to be very lean and very easily read, while still providing really consistent API. And as it turns out, after a while of iterating like that, we haven't actually broken much lately. And so Mojo got this reputation for, you have to be very careful about your dependencies. And we'll probably never say that it's, never going to change again. But it's gotten quite stable lately and quite beautiful as a result of our willingness to iterate on it.
So if you had these changes earlier, not recently, but earlier, these breaking changes, how did people who used Mojolicious manage to do you have some process of upgrading?
Well, first of all, we recommend Carton very heavily as you're developing, we recommend that you use Carton and pin your dependency of Mojolicious so that you know exactly where you've developed and which version you should use. We also have then a porting document that we try to keep up to date whenever we make a breaking change. It says this thing has changed, use this one instead, it's in the wiki. And for the most part, especially since, say, about 5.0, we're now into the 7.0 series, the changes have been mostly semantic. You change a name here or there. A few behaviors have gone away, but for the most part, it's been fairly easy. Oh, you used to use this, use that instead. Not too many things have really just plain out gone away.
I see. Okay. Do you know any projects that were written in Mojolicious, either open source or those that are, I mean, besides the company where you work, other
Yeah,
companies?
actually, I know that a lot of, first of all, well, the big one that we're always kind of proud of is Jan Henning Thorsen and Marcus Romberg wrote an IRC client in Mojolicious, and it's easy to compare it now that a lot of people have seen Slack. It feels a lot like Slack. It's IRC in the browser. You can pull it up on your phone, or you can pull it up on your desktop or your laptop, and it's all the same connection because you're hosting it in one place. And it behaves then as a web server that you can connect to and type into. If it's on the web is convos.by, if you want to look at that, and they have a little demo there. And actually, it's kind of fun to mention now they've just done a huge rewrite, and it's about to be released for the 1.0 version, which should be a lot easier to install. That was a little bit hard to install, was its big problem. Also, I know Toby Ediker, I hope I'm saying right, Ediker's tools are starting to be written into Mojolicious, which is quite fun for us to see people doing server administration using Mojolicious-based tools. Kind of interesting thing I didn't expect to see, but it was fun to see happen. As far as websites, first of all, we have lists of people who are using the Mojolicious on our wiki. We have, and even some user quotes about it. I know for some reason, Norway has a huge user base of Mojolicious. So I know Telenor is using it for some things, and there's a travel service out there that Jan Henning is actually moving to. I know they're using it. I wish I knew the name. I don't off the top of my head. We have some bigger sites. I don't know if I'm supposed to say, I think I'm allowed to say that we know that mail.ru, which is in the Alexa top 50, actually uses Mojolicious. Not for all of their site, but I think they're porting, even as they go, they're porting more to it. We were only just allowed to share that recently, so that's kind of fun for us to say. I have a nod and a wink that tells me that there's some Mojo being used at Craigslist. I hope I'm right in saying that, but that's kind of fun for us too. And plenty others, smaller sites that you can see if you go to our wiki and see the listings.
If we're talking already going to your wiki, where should people go if they want to learn Mojolicious, they want to start using it?
That's a great question. We have our website is mojolicious.org, or you can do this sort of more fun mojolicio.us, so it just looks like Mojolicious. But mojolicious.org is easier to say. And from there you can see the front page, kind of the pretty page. You can get documentation there, and then you can get links then from there to the GitHub as well. You can find us on, and the wiki is then through GitHub. It's a GitHub wiki. We have an IRC channel, irc.perl.org, and it's #mojo. And we are quite friendly, so, or we try to be at least. If it's not, come tell me and I will help you out. I'm your guy. So we do most of our communication through IRC. A lot of the development is through IRC. We're very proud of, if you come into the IRC and find a bug, we often have it fixed within minutes and released because because of our willingness to, I shouldn't say because we've kept the code base very clean over this time, we can react to issues very quickly. I think you'll remember back when there was that bug that was found in Bugzilla about the code interpolation, or the privilege escalation. The same thing that everyone has with the parameters. Did you get a list of parameters thing?
Something about CGI, I think.
Yeah, and most web frameworks copied that API, so most web frameworks had that same kind of a, I shouldn't say it's a vulnerability, it was a way that a user might accidentally write their code badly, and because of using the way that CGI had developed that API and we all copied, allowed users to write insecure code. And we put out a fix to that very evening, which was kind of fun for us to say, you know what? No, we won't let you write this unsafe code anymore. We're stopping it tonight. So we're very proud of our ability to respond very quickly, especially to security bugs, which have been few, but.
So any podcast or not podcast, screencasts or something that
yes,
sources, resources?
One of our core members, Glenn Hinkle, who goes by Tempire, has a series of Mojocasts. They are getting a little bit older, unfortunately, but for the most part, they're pretty good. We have a list of errata as well on the wiki. I should probably help him link that into the website. Unfortunately, Glenn has spent more of his time in iOS development lately. So though he's still around, if we ever need to call him in for a group chat, he'll be there. But he hasn't had quite as much time to spend on the Perl side. But his webcasts are amazing. Mojocasts, let me make sure. I believe it's mojocasts.com, but let me just quickly, yes, mojocasts.com. I was worried it was .org or something, but mojocasts.com is really good.
Okay.
And there are a few things that have changed since, and we've noted that on the wiki as well.
Good. Just one thing, going back before we're closing here. We mentioned CGI lately, and CGI sort of has a bad name, especially because it's old and it's rather slow when you're running CGI. So I wonder, how do you, when you're running Mojolicious, do you run it as a CGI script or?
Good point. No, it's not a CGI script, though it can actually run under a CGI server. If you have like a shared hosting or some, old servers, you can still run Mojolicious under a CGI environment, and it will work correctly. You can't use WebSockets or anything because, of course, you can't. CGI has no way to know how to do that. And I also should say that if you're using a PSGI server, which is fine, you can do that as well. Mojolicious will run as a PSGI server, but again, doesn't have the WebSockets because you need to have the event loop in the server level in order for that to work. So to say that, then, we do bundle our own web servers in with the distribution. We have a few of them. We have a basic daemon that is very capable, and we have a script called Morbo, which is nice because as you develop, it will notice that you've saved files and made changes, and it will restart the server for you, which is quite nice. And then we have a much more capable production server called Hypnotoad. And Hypnotoad is basically equivalent to the PSGI server Starman, if you're aware of Starman. Same sort of pre-forking architecture. It has one extra little feature of hot deployment. So if you say, I've made all these changes, I'd like to release a new server, or push to production, however you want to call this, and you don't want to have to bring your site down, you can actually tell Hypnotoad to start the new server, and as the old clients keep being served by that old server, new requests will go to the new server, and they never miss a beat. You can upgrade Mojolicious, you can upgrade your site, you can even upgrade your Perl while doing that. It's really quite interesting. And then I should also say, for all that capability, Mojolicious is still quite small. It's something about 8,400 lines of code, and as is kind of famously known, it has no non-core dependencies. It can use CPAN modules for extra behavior, like IO socket SSL for SSL connections and all kinds of other things if you want to use CPAN modules, but it doesn't need them, so it's very easy to install. And it's got 11,000 or so tests, so it has more tests than lines of code. So you can be reasonably sure that we've been careful about what we're doing. And all that installs in less than a minute. So if you're coming from a platform where it was hard to install, Mojolicious might be for you too.
That's really nice. So thank you for coming to this show and sharing all this information.
Happy to do it.
I wonder if you have anything else, a shout out or something that you would like to add that everyone ask.
Boy, it feels like I shouldn't I?
It's not a requirement. I just
No, I would just say give it a look. Come by the IRC channel. Actually, a thing you know what I could say. One of the things I particularly like about Mojolicious is there's a test framework called Test Mojo. Test : Mojo. It comes in the distribution. But I really like how it works, and I would encourage people that if you've had a hard time testing your web application before, even if it's not a Mojolicious application, you can use Test Mojo with a plugin that I've written, and I'm sure if we give some links here, I can give a link to it. But using that Test Mojo and a plugin that I've written, you can use it to test any other PSGI application as well. And it can be very nice to have the expressive nature of Test Mojo for any website you've developed. So I would give that a look too.
Yeah, I will add it to the show notes and the links.
Perfect.
Great. So thank you very much, and I hope that in a few months or when there's a new release, we can return to this conversation and see what changed and how to update it.
Will do.
Oh, thank you very much. Bye bye.
Yep, thank you.